Welcome, everybody. You guys want to come up? That was a great talk by Ed. I love the visuals. One thing I'll tell you is, as you all know, technology can be really amazing in a good way or a bad way. And when technology goes bad, it's really bad. My mom got me a Flowbee. Didn't work so well. All right, so seriously. So we have a great panel here today. I'm very excited about the topics we're going to cover. Before we kind of get into it, let me have each of the panel members maybe just briefly introduce themselves so you get a perspective of, you probably know most of these people, but just where they're coming from and what their capabilities are.
Good morning. Hello. Number one? Oh, here we go. So good morning, everybody. My name is Tan Lee. I'm the founder and CEO of Emotiv, and we're really proud to be a sponsor of the Neurogaming Conference. I've been in this space for about a decade personally, and we're pioneers in the EEG space, bringing EEG technology or electroencephalography, brainwave-based technologies to consumers. And Ed alluded to it in his talk. We've been out with a scientific contextual EEG, and we're coming out with the brain activity tracker, Emotiv Insight. And to all the Kickstarter backers who supported us last year, thank you so much. We're showing it here as well, so please do check it out. We've been in this space for a while, so very excited to see the industry kind of growing.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Thomas, and I'm the Haptics Gaming Evangelist from Immersion Company, which is just down the way here in Silicon Valley. And as I think you guys know, Immersion is really a pioneer in haptics technology, touch feedback, sensory technology. And that can be found in many industries. It's in automotive, it's in medical device, but we continue to believe that gaming is really the most applicable usage for this technology. And we're really excited about this conference and really where the industry is headed in general, because we see so many creative opportunities for touch feedback within the development community, but also externally with third-party supporting technology innovators. My background's a little unique. I'm not actually from the technical side of the industry. Prior to coming on board with Immersion, I founded and ran Somatone Interactive. And Somatone is a leading creative content creator for the gaming industry. So for the last 10 years, we've worked with AAA, mobile, casual, social, really every developer of gaming content, and sit in between the development pipeline and the external creative network and really facilitate that relationship. So it's kind of a nice place to be, being able to see how technology and the traditional development pipeline can really work together and converge with new technology.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shiraz Akmal, and I'm with Dreamworks Animation. So I handle business development and product development for a new group that was founded last year. Actually, our founder is somewhere in the audience, Brad Herman. And our group focuses on interactive, immersive, and mobile entertainment. We've spent maybe about a year and a half developing 19+ prototype experiences that actually leverage a lot of the technology that we see here on the floor today. And we work with a number of people that are here at the show. Our goal is to bring these new experiences and dream up of what our next generation storytelling experiences might be that we can bring to consumers, whether it be to theme parks or location-based entertainment, or to consumer products. And just last week, we came out with our first prototype that actually turned into something that we demonstrated to about 1,500 people. And it is called a Dragonflight VR experience. It's an actual Oculus Rift experience where, for those of you who have seen How to Train Your Dragon, this allows you to become Hiccup and fly Toothless as Dragon through the world of Burke. It's really fantastic, and it's one of many things coming out of Dreamworks to help sort of bring a lot of the great innovative things that people are building to mass markets. My background prior to Dreamworks is I spent 20+ years or so making video games. A lot of those games happen to be based on movies. I directed The Incredibles video games and SpongeBob and Scooby-Doo, and so I have a history of building games while people are making movies. So working at Dreamworks is really exciting because now we get to look ahead and see where these experiences and games could go and help get us there.
Hi, my name is David Holz. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Leap Motion, where we do next generation 3D motion control that can track both hands, 10 fingers to deep sub-millimeter accuracy. We have a device called the Leap Motion controller that's been on the market for almost a year now. That is a PC peripheral that does this. And our technology's been embedded in something like 12 HP consumer laptops and desktop models at this point. So my background is in physics and math. I used to, before sort of moving out to the Valley, I was working on things like that at NASA, UNC Chapel Hill, and the Max Planck Institute. I was sort of on 12 different research projects, but I really just wanted to work on one thing, and so this is what I'm doing.
Great, thank you all. And just briefly, my name is Jim Gatto. As Zach mentioned, I head up the social media and games practice at Pillsbury Law. Focus a lot on the intellectual property side and work in protecting a lot of these futuristic technologies and love to see all of these innovative ideas, and it really is something we really enjoy. So let me get into the questions here. And let's start with maybe some level setting, right? There's a lot of reality out there as far as what can currently be done and a lot of hype about what will be done in the future. What, from within your areas of expertise, maybe you could just kind of address that initially. What is the state of the technology that actually is working and operable and usable today? You want to start, Tim?
Yeah, sure. So in the context of electroencephalography or EEG, there are a number of things that are possible. So, we've always dreamed of being able to control things with our mind. This is probably one of mankind's longest sci-fi fantasies. And yes, it is possible to have some limited mental commands that are very distinct and very precise. So you can, try and move an object forward. We've done collaborations with Volkswagen where someone can drive a vehicle, turn left, turn right, drive forward, slow down. But that's really the extent of the mental commands that's possible. What's also possible is we can detect emotions. So we can detect emotions that are driven by physiological factors. So based on our evolutionary path, the way that we've evolved as humans. So when you actually feel angry or when you're feeling excited, your palms will sweat more, your heart rate will increase. And so all of that has an EEG-based correlate, and we can measure that. So we don't have to look at your heart rate, your galvanic skin response. We can just look at the EEG, and we can tell if you're frustrated, if you're relaxed, if you're excited, if you're really engaged. So those emotional metrics are also possible with the technology. And the third thing we can detect reliably is facial expressions. Now, normally, facial expressions are an artifact that's superimposed. It's a noise that's superimposed onto the electrical signals, and most companies just filter them out. But what we do, because we're sophisticated machine learning and pattern recognition classifying models, we can actually use them as smart artifacts. So we classify those normal noise artifacts and we use them as commands. So you can reliably measure eye blinks, eye movement, left, right eye movement. We can look at smiling, grimacing, raising your eyebrows, furrowing your eyebrows. So all of those can be introduced as reliable facial expressions that you can introduce into an avatar or into a virtual world so that you can interact much more naturally in that environment. So those are what's possible today in terms of this state-of-the-art technology.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Wow, that's a tough one to follow. That's pretty amazing. Haptic technology isn't, it's been around for a while. I think what's revolutionary about what we're doing is the fidelity. When people think of haptics, the first thing that I hear is, rumble pack, which is true in terms of, the haptic nature of what a rumble pack does, but it's a poor analogy because the fidelity is really impressive, and a lot of work has been done to create a very high level of detail in terms of what the technology can convey to the user. So, one industrial application of that is in the medical device world, where you really have to have precision. There's no room for error, and if your device is going to talk to you and communicate, it really has to do so in a way that's highly accurate, or it can lead to obvious negative consequences. So, if you imagine the potential there and the stakes involved, and you translate that over into a gaming environment, you begin to get a much better perspective of what can be done in terms of communicating to the player. The work we're doing now that I'm personally very excited about is looking at how to actually create a lexicon for these feedback impulses that are able to communicate in an intuitive manner, so that you don't need to have a visual identifying event in order to be told what is going on. You can identify through the touch feedback what is happening, good, bad, something neutral, maybe even something narrative, without needing the visual storyline to support the feedback. So that's really exciting, something that we're working on, and we really see the future in haptics being sort of leading that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think from an entertainment perspective, we kind of look at things in a way where we're able to build lots of things, and I think due to a lot of the contributions that my fellow panelists have made into this field, in this industry, we're able to actually build things and experience them. But from our perspective, we always ask ourselves one question, and it generally comes down to, we'll build something and we'll say, well, then what? How do we make this more accessible? How do we make it more consumer friendly? Is it ready for prime time? And so we kind of have a deep pipeline of projects where we're constantly doing R&D, we're constantly trying to decide, how do we make this mass market, and what are the venues for distributing these kinds of experiences? And so, a lot of it comes down to, if I think back to my years of game design and experience, we would always have the 3 C's rule: character, camera, and controls. And we would build and design games and experiences with those 3 things in mind. So rather than build a game and port it to take advantage of new hardware, you'd invent a new game around the hardware. And so at Dreamworks, we're really focused on, all right, whether it's VR or haptic technology or motion sensing technology, how do we build an experience that its core is built around the input that people provide to the device, rather than something that's more of a port. And with our Dragonflight VR experience for Dragons 2, we went to the extent of actually building a real saddle and a real harness that you hold on to, and really preparing the user so that they're actually physically kind of in the position that they would actually fly a dragon if dragons actually existed. And that goes a long way in terms of making the experience memorable and making people want to continue doing it more. And so I think there's a lot possible, but it's how do you tailor it so that it is accessible and friendly, and that's the fun part about being here at this conference, because there's so many things we can do, and just a matter of like, well, how do we make it so that my mom can try it and she won't get sick or have a terrible experience. Rather, she'd have an experience that will live with her for a long time.
Thanks, David.
So motion control is starting to get to the point where it's really small and pretty cheap, and it can track very, very fine motion, like enough to see the heart rate off the shaking of your fingertips. And at the same time, it's able to do that at hundreds of frames a second at very, very low latencies. And of course, not just a fingertip, but it's sort of worth sort of thinking about it in terms of maybe dimensionality. So whereas a lot of our previous inputs have been something like you can move in 2 dimensions, or kind of move in 3 dimensions with maybe multiple joysticks. Even just the position of one finger in the air has 6 dimensions, so it's both the position and the angle and the orientation of that finger. And all of a sudden, you can track 10 fingers on 2 hands and every single joint on the hand. And so you're going to a point where you can not only do this sort of tracking cheaply, inexpensively, very quickly, very accurately, but you're also all of a sudden opening up this sort of path to having like something like 22 dimensions of information per hand. People can just rapidly communicate to technology, and it's such a departure from what we've had in the past. A lot of the barriers now are sort of people sort of just absorbing that and figuring out, okay, how do we use that, and what does that make technology today?
Great, thanks. So if we move beyond what's kind of capable today, if you were to kind of pick one thing just to kind of throw out to the audience, that this is your equivalent of Ed's Victorian postcards, looking forward, what's the most mind-blowing thing that you see coming from a technology perspective, looking down the future? When we start with David.
Ooh, are we 100 years or I don't know?
50 years.
50. Oh, okay.
You pick 50.
I think that. Okay. Maybe I think something that's going to be interesting is right now there's this distinction. There's this sort of thing that people call digital, and people say like, yeah, that's a digital thing. And you kind of ask, like, what does that really mean? Like, when people say that, I don't think they mean, like, oh, I can see the ones and zeros. Like, what they mean is that there's this thing that I'm calling digital, it doesn't look real, it doesn't act real, I can't interact with it like it's real. And so, and I'm just going to call the way that it is digital. But as those things start to change, as things start to look more real, as they start to act more real, as they start to be able to interact with them in a more real way, what does that word sort of digital mean? And I think it'll start to mean something kind of different, kind of like how we say that things are made of atoms, but I don't really, that's just something I say, like it's, or you know, like the ones and zeros sort of become this atoms and something that I don't really perceive. And the fact that something is a digital object, in some ways, I think, how should I say, I think it'll kind of just become a material of the world, where like things can be made out of plastic, or things can be made out of steel or wood, or things can be made out of sort of this digital stuff. And it's just a sort of thing that the world is made of. And I think that'll be, like that sort of distinction, where it's no longer a separate world, where it's just a new material of this existing world, I think will be really interesting. And I think that the weirdness of it is not just from that, I think will come from the fact that it'll be sort of seen as, how should I say, not a material that we get from the world around us, but a material that we sort of pull out of our brains. It's sort of this thought stuff, and that thought stuff itself sort of becomes this material that fills the world around us.
Interesting. Shiraz?
Well, for the longest time, I've always imagined, building games within games within games, and where you kind of entered this universe, and within that universe there was, other places to go. And I think, today, now that I think back to, this was maybe 10 years ago, me thinking along those lines. Today, I think with things like the Rift and some of these kind of sensory sort of experiences, for me, when we do it well, there's this sense of presence in these experiences where you feel like you're there. And when I say you're there, it doesn't mean that it's realistic. In fact, from our perspective, we're trying to be very creative and artistic with whatever the experiences might be. So the idea that you're there, to me, seems like would be a great leap, because today, honestly, for me, whether it's the Xbox Connect or whatever device I'm interacting with, at some point, I break the boundary of the device and I break the illusion that I'm actually there. Instead, I'm fighting with the controls, or I'm trying to readjust the calibration. And I think it would be really fantastic in the next, and it'll probably happen sooner than 50 years, where the experiences, the entertainment that we enjoy, we feel connected to. There's that presence that, especially for those people that have never tried the Rift. This happened last week. We had most of the people we ran through our experience had most of them didn't play games, a lot of them never tried anything like the Rift, and they felt like they were somewhere else. And I think as we kind of hone that, I think that's really, the removal of these barriers to how you interface with technology, I think would be a huge leap forward. And so I kind of place my bet on that, kind of opening the doors for, this explosion of these other sorts of ideas actually being able to take root.
Great. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, I'd kind of dovetail on that, and I think where I see the future is the culmination of all of these ideas into a one. Everything's individualized and compartmentalized. You've got someone working on neuro brainwave transmission technology, and we've got someone with gesture control, and we're actually trying to talk to people through haptics, and everyone else in this audience is working on their kind of siloed concept. And at a certain point, all of these things need to come together, and they all need to congeal into a single experience, not these individual experiences where you're trying to sort of create. It's almost like Minecraft. It's like we've got all the Legos, and now we need to build a thing. And that thing becomes what we actually interface with and have this sense of true engagement where you're not fighting with the controls and you're not sort of compartmentalized in terms of your engagement, but you can truly interact in a holistic manner. And we are clearly on the dawn of that because there's so much innovation and so many ideas and concepts in play. I think we're going to need those 50 years to figure out how they're all going to come together and create a single unified experience.
Yeah, we're just at the beginning of the wearables movement at this time, and so things that I'm wearing now, I think it's going to be a commonplace, but the biosensing will be much more unobtrusive. So it will be part of who you are and what you're doing every day. And the biosensing allows that unique, individualized tailoring with the Internet of Things. So when you walk into your home, the walls can change and dynamically respond to how you're feeling. The immersion will be much more with leap motion. You'll be able to wave things around and get things. So you'll be able to interact both with technologies that are embedded and basically looking at you, but also through gestural controls and other forms of sensing devices that are inputted around your home to really not only measure how your health is tracking, help you with your entertainment, but also connect with your loved ones. So you probably will be able to tell, how your mum is feeling right now, 10,000 miles away in Australia, like my mum. So I think we'll be able to have connected devices that will be able to sense how our loved ones are and then interact with our own environment. I think it's going to be quite an amazing place.
Sounds good. So the next question I want to ask is, so we've talked about the technology. Let's think about the interaction between technology and games. And is it more the technology will enhance existing games, or do you see there being more just entirely new games or game mechanics being built, or obviously some of both? But if you could maybe speak to that, maybe if you want to start, Shiraz.
Yeah, sure. I think, that's a great question. And like to my earlier comments, I really think that the best experiences or the best games are built around the input controls, because that's how you kind of connect with the experience. So I think, it doesn't mean that it can't be a layer. I think back to the PlayStation and when Rumble packs were created and all the vibration things, and we often would build games where everything was vibrating, and it would wear out the batteries or wear out stuff, and players would turn it off because it was a little overdone. And so I think that was more kind of an add-on to the experience. And I think there were several games that were really well done with rumble and vibration. And I think lessons from the past can be applied to the future, which is to really build a cool, unique experience. You kind of build it around how the user physically interacts with it. And so I'm more leaning towards build something unique for new platforms versus adding it as a layer, so to speak.
David?
I like to think of them almost not as platforms, but as like their mediums. It's like paint or sound, and it's sometimes they say like this book was made to be a movie, and if that's the case, then it's good to it's good to then take that and move it to maybe the medium that it was really meant to be in. But very often, I think most forms of art were made for the medium that they were sort of designed for, and moving something from one medium to another is a very tricky thing, and I think that although it's very tempting, I think that a lot of the value comes from people who can take a new medium and sort of find the new art for it. And we've never really been at a point where there's been sort of mediums popping up around us everywhere, and so it's sort of this new skill, almost to the point where people haven't identified that it's a skill. But I really think that as things are changing so rapidly around us, one of these new valuable things that we're going to have to learn is sort of how to find the art in these mediums around us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's actually a question a lot of people are struggling with right now. And it's a bit of a dance, you know. I mean, it's the chicken and the egg in a sense, in terms of, does the technology lead the game design, or does the game design then suggest the need for the new technology? And I think when they're done in concert is when it's most effective. You know, Nintendo is an example of that, where they've really created hardware and games that support the hardware, and they've done them together. And they've done it in a way where they were designed to support one another. They didn't create some device and say, well, here you go, game community, you know, figure it out, do something with it. And the game community is never going to create something that they can't support and release. So there has to be this sort of merging of these somewhat siloed industries, where you've got the, you know, the game designers and the commercial gaming industry kind of doing what they do and just plowing forward with what works. We've got everyone in here innovating and creating possibilities for the future. And so there needs to be some format or forum for merging. And I guess that's exactly why we're here, which is that idea of how do we take the technology and create awareness of it and how it can be used and how it can be commercially accessible, or, you know, have appeal beyond the technology on its own.
Well, for us, building a vibrant developer and research community has always been a core of our philosophy, and that's the reason for that is because we believe that building a product that's tailored for the device is very, very key in order to provide the best experience. So we have a very simple product called Emotiv, which basically allows you to do key bindings from the device, the inputs from the device into any sort of game. So if you want to play Harry Potter and it's a PC game and you want to change the X button to, you know, say lift the rock into think lift the rock, you can do that, but very simply with just doing the key bindings, but that only takes you maybe a quarter of the way there in terms of the experience, the immersion. It's all about being able to really take everything else, like the facial expressions, like the emotional responses, of being able to change the music, change the scene, introduce other elements. That's when it becomes really exciting. And I think that really takes a dedicated effort from a designer, the developers, to really go under the hood and work with the SDK to achieve that level of integration. So we're all for, you know, deep integration.
Great. Well, it sounds like from that there's still a lot of thinking to be done in this space, but maybe if I could ask, and to dovetail on your last answer, Tan, as far as what are some examples, maybe specific examples of either game mechanics or kind of game features that will be enabled by some of these technologies that don't really exist today?
Well, you know, from the standpoint of game, say, difficulty adjustment. So right now, you know, you can set easy, medium, difficult, for example. Dynamic difficulty adjustment is really, really difficult in gameplay, and you're play tuning the game in order to hit a large audience. Being able to observe when the player, the individual player, is feeling frustrated, when they're actually engaged, when they're feeling a little anxious in a game, and then being able to, say, introduce something that feels like a heartbeat, or changing the tune of the lighting in the scene or the environment, or when they've sustained injury, allowing them to duck out and heal themselves by just, you know, calming themselves down. That creates a level of immersion that doesn't really exist today in the game. Or when you walk up to another character, being able to allow them to just smile, to introduce themselves, seems a lot more natural than having to type something into the interaction. So maybe you can allow that with voice or with chatting, but being able to convey the facial gestures in the game itself is really something that doesn't exist right now. And obviously the fantasy-based games where you're trying to, you know, lift something with your mind or move an object with your thoughts, then obviously that is a lot more real when you're not pressing a button and just thinking it.
Nick?
Yeah, you know, I mean, the initiative that we're currently pushing hard is more mobile-focused than anything. And the challenge with mobile games is really that one of the two primary senses is typically not part of the experience, which is, of course, audio. You know, you see the game, but because of either just the habit of turning off your phone or because of being in a crowded environment where there's a lot of background noise, you are effectively hearing compromised at that point. Audio plays a very important part in games. It tells you what's going on. It tells you the emotional story. The music tells you how to feel. The sound design tells you what's going on. And when you remove all of that, you know, I mean, as George Lucas famously said, that audio is 50% of the experience, presumably 50% of the experience of the gameplay is now compromised. And what we're looking to do is use haptic effects as a replacement or a substitute for the audio cues that would normally tell the player how they're performing. So if you've done something good, if you've done something bad, if you've leveled up, if you're, you know, on a rumble strip in a racing game, if you've failed, if you're low on energy or health, it doesn't really matter. Typically, audio would help bring awareness to the player that that is what was happening. And the haptic design is a very exciting way to replace that because, again, with the fidelity component that I talked about earlier, there is a very subtle and sort of artistic and creative way to create haptic effects that communicate to the player what is going on so that that other sensory part of the experience is still in place. It just shows up in a different manner, but you still are able to have a fully immersive experience, whether the audio is part of it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with both of your thoughts. I mean, we've all, I'm sure everyone's read or seen, you know, the Ender's Game, and I remember as a boy reading that book and thinking, to your effect, you know, to what you're building, I'm like, oh, one day, you know, this game's gonna challenge me, and based on my, you know, fear of, you know, heights or, you know, big grasshoppers, which I'm scared of. And so I think that was what, maybe, is it 30 years ago, 40 years, so maybe another 15 years, maybe we'll be there, maybe sooner. So, so I think, you know, you can always look at the past to kind of see what the future might lie. And I think, you know, Ed's keynote was great in the sense of, you know, where we think things are going. But I think Ender's Game, and I think more recently, you know, required reading Brad has made for our department is one of the books is Ready Player One, and if those of you haven't read that, I highly recommend getting that. But that's kind of an updated version of what the future could look like, and it's kind of funny with the Facebook and Oculus acquisition. It seems more real now this week than it did maybe 2 months ago. So so I think that you know, there's definitely, you know, I think the immersion and, you know, all these sorts of things we're talking about. But one other note is you know, I think it's easy to overdo anything, like any kind of feature or technology, because we're so excited that, wow, you know, when 3D movies first came out, everything was like in your face, you know, and whoever was making the movies, they just wanted to make sure that the audience knew that this was in 3D, and this thing, you know, whether it's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids at Disneyland or some other film, it was very over the top. And if you look at 3D movies today, certainly the movies that like Dreamworks or Disney make, things are very subdued and more artistic and subtle, and audiences can appreciate the subtleties there. And I think with everything we're doing, we need to make sure that we kind of do it in a very kind of subtle and integrated way, so not to overwhelm the user or to turn them off or to be too gimmicky. And I think that's critical to really expand the audience that would be interested in the kinds of things that we're trying to introduce to the market. So.
I might classify things into maybe like a few different sets. There's sort of things that you already do that we can then use with these new interfaces. Like you know, if I have a SWAT team and I want to give my hand signals to them quietly, you know, in a very easy way, that's something that's like kind of a direct mapping to something that's sort of already done to something that can now be provided in a more natural way. There are things that are sort of things that you can kind of do, but are almost too difficult to really make a successful game in the past. So like if I wanted to, you know, Minecraft has a very simple way of moving blocks around, but with my hands, I could grab one block, put two blocks together, and then take another block and put that on, you know, rotate around and put it on that side, and then I can, you know, duplicate it and you know, like there's some very complicated, fluid, physical, like 3D interactions that become possible, and that's really interesting, where you couldn't really expect people to do that before. And then there's the things that just were completely not possible. So like if I have like, maybe I have like a swarm of fighter jets and I want to tell something to do a spiral, a corkscrew, and then move like where I'm expressing shapes, that just can't really be done with any kind of two-dimensional input device. where I'm not just doing something physical that can be sort of mapped with the 2D, like I can move blocks around with a 2D input device, even though it's difficult. But if I'm trying to do like a helix that moves back through itself, at that point I'm now expressing a concept that simply wasn't expressible before. It's not that it's complicated, it's just that it was in no way could I build, and even start to build an experience that relied on anything like that. I like the last one the most, but even the first ones are fun.
That's great, thanks. So the next question kind of touches a little bit on your last answer, Shiraz, and kind of takes it from there. So there's lots of possibilities of what we can do with the technology. What is it that consumers really want? Right? You said we can go too far, but what do you think are the aspects that people really want, and what are the things to be cautious about? And you mentioned some of those. Maybe if you want to start with this one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think consumers. I mean, we're all consumers. We like to be entertained and have a good time and have fun, and so I think that's kind of. I'm speaking again from the entertainment perspective, but obviously there's other fields and industries that have different kind of goals, whether it's health and well-being and those sorts of things. And I have personal interests in those areas. But I think, I think consumers really want to, we have limited time each day, and you want to have an entertaining experience. And I think there's probably two kinds of experiences. There's the passive experience where I just want to sit there and be entertained, and then there's the more, involved experience, engaged experience, where I want to be involved in the experience. I want to be able to impact the experience. I want this experience or this game to react to me. And so I think consumers fall into those two categories. I don't think it's either or. And I think so. There's opportunities for business in reaching those two kinds of markets. And there's probably other variations of that, but. That's more of a general kind of thought there, but that's the way at least I think about, when we build something, who is the audience and how are they going to consume this?
What do you think?
Well, the way I think about it as an innovator is what Henry Ford said, which is, if I were to ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so, when I grew up, watching Star Wars, I wanted to move things with my mind. And it wasn't possible then, but it's the stuff of dreams. And I think that, sometimes you have to push the envelope, you have to lead the way, and sometimes we could miss the boat because we're too early, but I think it's still worth fighting for and worth trying and worth innovating, creating it, and hopefully build a community around it. So I'm of both views. One side of me, the pragmatic side, says, let's get something that's, what the consumers want. But at the same time, there's a passion inside me that says, I'm going to create something that I feel really I love, I'm really inspired by, and let's see where we can go with it.
Nick?
Yeah, I agree with Shiraz that it's easy to overdo the experience because you're so excited about your technology. The key terms that we use within Immersion are to surprise and delight players. That you're trying to make the experience more fun and more enjoyable, but it's really secondary to the game. It's really secondary to the experience, not trying to distract or lead the experience. So, you also have to somewhat define consumer, because the marketplace has gotten so diverse. We're really focused on the casual, mobile kind of gaming market right now. And that's a different consumer base than the AAA console player. Those are different worlds, and so they have different expectations, and you have to approach them separately. So for us, it's more of a subtle approach to just enhance the experience rather than to define it.
David?
I think that a lot of times wants are sort of generated by either new technology replacing something like older, like an ebook reader replaces a book to some extent. So that's something that somebody might want. Or if something makes something that is just sort of maybe something that already exists, but it's just better. So like a bigger screen TV, it's better, and so that's something that I want. But I think another thing that's interesting sometimes that maybe plays more to the Ford type quote is something that makes people sort of feel like they need something. And often the needs don't come from the betters or the replacings, but it comes from the mores. So like, I don't need a big TV, but I need a TV because a TV is something that is more than, like I can do more with a TV than I can do without a TV. And so it's one of those, so I think that's where some of the biggest potential lies, is it's sort of not just how can we use technology to make things better or to replace things, but how can we actually let people do more, like enable totally new things that are valuable and interesting in themselves. And that creates that need, which is maybe even, this is like the ultimate thing, if you can get that.
Right. Let me ask one more question, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So we've talked about games mostly from an entertainment perspective. We can maybe just kind of quickly address, what are your thoughts as far as how games and these technologies can be used to enhance games for other purposes, whether it's educational or training or other types of applications other than pure entertainment? Maybe we'll start with Tan and go down the line.
Yeah, well, we have our product in more than 100 countries worldwide, and we're seeing the emergence of, gaming is a subcategory within the brain-computer interface category for us. And so that involves anything that involves a human controlling something using their thoughts or using brainwaves. And so that could be driving a car, it could be controlling your smart home, it could be controlling a toy, it could be controlling a game. But some of the other areas are neuromarketing, so being able to look at where your eyes are gazing, what you're looking at, but also looking at the brain's response so that you can have contextual information instead of going out and asking someone, so how did you feel about that shopping experience? You can actually have them deployed in the shop and see exactly what they looked at and how they felt about it. Another segment for us is learning, so learning from learning difficulties like ADD, ADHD, all the way through the other end of the spectrum, looking at performance athletes and how they're performing and really tuning yourself to be able to really perform at your peak. And then the final segment for us is medical and research, and we have a large portion of our community who are disabled, being able to give them a way to rehabilitate after an accident, or giving them an opportunity to stay, to have some independence post the trauma, or to even allow them to have some way of entertaining themselves. So being able to fly and move around in the world, even though you have limited capacity to do that in the real world. So I think there's a whole host of different possibilities there that's very exciting with an underlying technology like this, which is broader than just games.
Yeah, as the haptic gaming evangelist, I'm really in the gaming modality, and certainly there's tons of applications for mental control tools. I think to answer your question, where we would be looking outside of just traditional games is in accessibility to games, improving the experience for visually impaired players, auditorially impaired players, even touch sensitive or touch impaired players. That is something that we're really passionate about as well, and we want to bring more of the haptic experience into the gaming community just to expand the reach and to bring the joy of playing games to people who might otherwise have a difficult time doing such a thing.
That just reminds me, was it maybe 20 years ago? I can't remember. I used to live up here in Berkeley, and I worked at a little company called Berkeley Systems, and I programmed like some of the After Dark stuff, and You Don't Know Jack, and it was a trivia game. Yeah, hey fans. And You Don't Know Jack is still in existence today. But part of we had a team, and we did a lot of research into how we can make things accessible and scaling up your screen and magnifying, the desktop. And that always kind of stuck in my mind, and I think that today, I kind of think about accessibility. There's certainly a group of us at Dreamworks, and Dreamworks as a company is really kind of very has a lot of interest in other sorts of things in terms of helping nonprofits and things like that. That I guess where my thoughts were is that for me, I've always believed that when you're engaged, you can learn and you can experience things. And I always, for me, think, well, entertainment is like the easiest way to engage someone and use that as a jumping off point to introduce them to other things. And so, outside of the game and entertainment business, I think there's a lot of opportunity to help people that have like chronic issues For example, I mean, as a father, I have, I've gone through some experiences where, children that have chronic issues where they can't focus on specific tasks, whether it's like an autism spectrum related stuff, seems like games and forms of electronic entertainment really help kind of break through that. So just for me speaking personally, I'm very interested in what that could do for people in those sorts of situations. And it seems like there's a number of you out there that are researching and investing in that sort of space. So I'd love to talk to you about that as well.
My favorites tend to be like there's creation, so it's like you could mold something in the air and then 3D print it right behind you. And it's kind of like you've just willed something into reality. Or or maybe you're doing some kind of music and you're modulating 3 different or 4 different or 6 different dimensions of that music in real time with your hands. Or then there's exploration, which is like there's a lot of things out there, and it's a shame that we don't more often use the power of technology to better perceive and understand and explore those things. Whether it's a data set of a genome, or like the stock market, and so there's all sorts of just really interesting stuff out there, and I think using these technologies to help get a better sense of those, to perceive them, to feel them in some way that we couldn't before is also really interesting.
Great. Well, let's open up to questions. I think there's a roving mic. If you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll get a mic to you. There's one right down in front here.
Thank you. David, you talked about the challenges of changing something from one medium to another. You gave the example of a book being turned into a movie. And I'm thinking, hearing you all, I'm wondering whether that same analogy could be applied to your whole effort. We talk about knowing our emotions. Our bodies are exquisitely designed to process a whole lot of internal information from our faces, from our from our nervous system, to tell us about our emotions. We talk about expressing emotions so other people can register them. We have multiple channels in our faces and subtle changes in our voices, our facial expressions, our body posture. We have a brain that's better at processing, doing multiple information integration than anything else that can be created. You talk about communicating at a distance. Well, we have language, we have poetry. We have many other ways that we can communicate these things at a distance. You talk about joy and pleasure. So we get joy and pleasure from many other things as well. So then the question comes, why do this translation from the book of our bodies to the movie of your games? And I mean, I can understand that, well, it's there, so let's do it. I can understand that it makes a whole lot of money. But I'm wondering if you can articulate any other reasons why, as a society, we would want to translate this book into a movie.
It's a really good question. So I think let me try to. There's a lot there. So I think there's the sort of fundamental assumption that most people in technology have, which is that we can be better with technology or through technology than we can without it. As a whole, that we can be better creatures, we can be more advanced creatures, and there's some ways that sort of directly. Let me try to give some examples of that. So, my voice, my voice works perfectly well, but through technology, people all around the world can hear that in an instant. So it's sort of as if technology has amplified my voice, has amplified the concept of communication, and that's something that's really interesting. And I think, so again, with a lot of the, I like to say, I guess there's 2 parts to it with respect directly to us. And one is sort of like, the digital world is sort of traditionally, technology as a whole is often interacted with in such a strange way that people's sort of, their abilities in the real world and their abilities in the technology world are often 2 totally separate things, and skills don't transfer. Someone like Jane Goodall was maybe really, could be really good at going out to someplace strange and figuring things out. But the second that you have a quest that requires technology, like understanding the brain, someone like her can't necessarily help because it's just so technological that her skills cannot transfer over that boundary. And that's mostly because of, I think, interaction. And because it's just, working with technology is so different from working with the real world that there's just no way for us to sort of just be human and do that through technology. And I think a lot of this is sort of technology becoming more human. And I think in terms of I think a lot of it is, in some ways, it's not making reality more technological, it's sort of making technology more sort of physical and more like reality. So you're right that a lot of it is, it's not like, I'm not saying that like everything needs to, that you need to be able to build a building with abstract gestures, but maybe you should be able to build a building with technology, and using all those technological tools, since it is better. You can undo, you can redo, you can change materials, you can change shapes, but being able to do that in a more physical way that is more natural. So that way somebody can know something about, can actually sort of know something about, can actually have built something with their hands, and then they can build something with technology that can help them build things better with their hands. And I think things have kind of diverged to such an extent that I've heard that you start to hear really strange things. Like one time I heard somebody, one time I was in a cafeteria, and on one side of the cafeteria there was like a workshop where they were building rockets, and on the other side of the cafeteria was a place where the people were designing rockets on computers. And somebody asked me, "Do you think we're ever going to build rockets with, like, design rockets with our hands?" And I was like, you see, on one side of the room, people are building rockets with their hands. It's like they can literally be directly next to each other, and people can just say, like, I don't understand. Can technology be in any way related to the world around us? And I don't know. I think that a lot of that's what I was talking about, where it's sort of technology, digital things not being like this separate pseudo world, but actually being a new sort of thought layer stuff of the real world. It's sort of like if any sufficiently advanced technology is magic, then I very much think that like the magic of the future is this sort of digital stuff becoming this sort of this sort of omnipresent, not necessarily omnipowerful, but very powerful layer of the whole world around us, and like the interaction is sort of like our ability to exert that magic, to the place around us, and I don't know if that's too abstract, but I'm happy to.
Another question.
Thanks, guys, for the great discussion. So I have a question just around sort of benchmarking the pace of change in all of your industries. So I was wondering if you might each just very briefly sort of describe what's been the biggest development or something that's been the most exciting that you've seen over the last 12 months.
Well, I think one of the things for us is we've been really, as a company, investing a lot in research and technology and optimizing our pipelines in terms of how we do every aspect of our business, from motion capture to how we animate things, all those sorts of things that you kind of expect. But I think that we're seeing this kind of opportunity, this expansion of the business due to kind of digital media. And so, from everything from the VR platforms that now potentially may actually be platforms that you can develop content on and make money for, to all of these sorts of cinema, 4D, 5D type experiences that kind of take more input. So we're exploring, all those sorts of things, and they all seem obviously more realistic and attainable, today than it would have been like 10 or 15 years ago. And so maybe not in the last 12 months, but there's this kind of acceleration that I think people have hinted at of all these things now coming along, and you can now connect them all in different ways and create new experiences. And so that's really been our focus for the last year or so, is prototyping and building things to see what is possible, and seeing how we can make them potentially commercially viable, if that. So.
In our space, brain measurement is very, very challenging. And so one of the fundamental things that you want to do when you're looking at measuring the brain is you need spatial resolution, because of this part of your face is very prone to noise. Every time you speak, it introduces noise. And so being able to start, measuring your brain from the top part of your head and then having an array of sensors around your head and measuring through hair is really, really fundamental to getting good spatial resolution of the brain. And one of the things that we're really excited about is some new sensor technology that's allowing us to measure electrical signals, EEG, through hair with a combination of electronics and polymer sensors that allows us to do that. And I think that's going to really open up the possibilities for really good brain measurement and at the same time making it easy enough to use for consumers to just put it on and wear it and use it. So in the past, with gel or saline solution, there's a very high barrier to entry that allows normal folks to want to use this technology. But with these new sensor technologies, I think it's going to allow us to start really accelerating the rate of adoption of this technology.
I think for us, it's not so much the technology, but the marketplace. With mobile gaming specifically, we've sort of hit this this zenith in terms of platforms. New augmentation will arrive, but there's not a whole lot of other platforms out there that are really on the horizon. Maybe Google Glass. We'll kind of see where that goes. But now that we've sort of hit this ceiling, things are starting to plateau and move in creative ways horizontally. And we are seeing that in just a much more interested perspective when it comes to our technology. People actually are interested, they want it, they're seeking it, versus it having to be a more kind of persuaded event conversation in the past. And because the marketplace has gotten so crowded and there's so much going on, that also creates opportunities for game developers to think of new ways to innovate. And that is really going to be done, in my opinion, through technology, through haptics, through brainwave technology, through everything else that we're talking about here. So it feels like the time is now, in that sense, to me, that people need it in order to innovate because the platforms themselves have sort of peaked.
In the motion sensing space, there's this really interesting thing that's happening, which is things are getting so small and so thin that we can actually start to talk about putting them in other devices, and not just having devices that are not just having motion sensing devices, but having devices with motion sensing. And it's the point where I can if I try to hold up one of our versions, you probably can't even see it on the screen. It's sort of things are getting to that size and that cost where we can really where that becomes a conversation that's really interesting.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Nicole Lazaro from Zio Design. And I was curious, given that games are about choices, which involves the cortex, right? The stuff on the outside, and EEGs can measure about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch in, but the emotions come from the limbic system, which is much deeper. And the limbic system is non-linguistic. You can't talk. It's not rational. And it's basically the trick of games is to get those two systems together, and so that's when you get that really exciting experience. And then given also that you can measure emotions through facial expressions, and certainly my studio has gotten a lot of mileage out of that, if you know the 4 keys to fun or anything like that, where we've directly measured facial expressions and mapped them to the most exciting choices that players make in the game. How soon are we going to get the ability to actually get into deep enough into the brain to measure the limbic system directly, or get enough fidelity on the outside to get at least this the Ekman 7 fax coding on the face? And then if we can get directly to that limbic system, what would you guys do?
Nice to see you again, Nicole. It's been a long time. I think you hit a really great question, and I think ultimately a lot of gameplay is around getting to that emotion, that underlying drive. Why do people want to play? And limbic system is very, very difficult to really access unless you're looking at fMRI scans, which get to that deep spatial resolution of the brain. And so the only way to really do it is through indirect measurements. I think we're doing a lot of studies that correlate EEG with fMRI, and not so dense array EEG, but also with lower count channel EEGs to see if we can build a correlate, a model that we could use with portable systems. And I think that will allow us to build models that are close enough, that are better approximations of what the limbic system is doing, even though it's not a direct measurement, that will get us closer to where we need to be.
Any other thoughts on that one? All right. Well, I think our time's about up. I want to thank the panelists very much for some very interesting insights and some great conversation. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.